And everyone raises their hand. One guy says, I learned how to be good from my 5-year-old. I took him to his native place in Mexico, and it was the night before Christmas. I had just given him a bunch of gifts. I said, you have to wait till midnight. He was excited. He plays with all his newfound gifts, falls asleep. In the morning, there's a young child from the neighborhood slums that ends up walking past their door. And so dad says, I want to teach my son how to be a good kid, you know? And so he's like, son, you must share one of your toys. And the son's like, no, Dad, I'm not going to do it. And then blah, blah, blah. And then the dad looks at him and is like, no, son, you must share one of your toys. And it was like this Simba Mufasa moment, you know. And he sees that dad's kind of serious, so he throws another tantrum, still doesn't work. And then he's like, okay, enterprising kid, maybe a little like me. He's like, well, if I have to give one, let me give my least favorite one, right? So he picks that one up, he's about to go to the door, and dad says, no, son, not that one. Give him your favorite toy. And so the son throws this giant tantrum. He's like, no way, there's no way that, but he looks at dad and is like, yeah, Mufasa, I'm serious, you know. And so he takes his favorite toy, he goes out to the door, gives it to him, and as he's doing that, when he comes back, or as he's coming back, their dad is thinking, you know, I want to encourage his generosity journey. I want to do this and that. Maybe I'll get him the same toy. I'll say nice things to him. But lo and behold, this kid comes back with a giant smile on his face, looks at his dad, says, Dad, that was amazing. Can I do it again? And this is how he learned. I think in my case, I kept on doing it. My dad's like, are you sure you want to keep doing it? You know, but that's been my journey, that I think it just makes sense. It rings true at so many levels of my being. And so I think this notion of what is that slightly more infinite game that we know to be true in our bones, that we know to be true at so many layers of our experience. This is sort of a quote that I want to share from a book by James P. Carse by the name Infinite and Finite Games. The first part of the quote is this: a finite game is played for the purpose of winning. So anytime you win, you create a whole bunch of losers. That's one way to win. That's one way to get a dopamine high, but it's not quite working out for humanity to design for this base level instinct. This is Reid Hoffman in 2011, way back then, founder of LinkedIn, right, that we're all on. I'm not, by the way, but he says, social networks do best when they tap into one of the 7 deadly sins. Right? Facebook is ego, Zynga at that time, big gaming company, still is. LinkedIn, his own company, is greed. He's saying, I've designed all this to sort of tweak at these 7 deadly sins. Now, who's talking about the 7 viral virtues? I don't know, but this is sort of status quo of finite games. And you know, I won't go more into this, but if you see, right, we used to play sports, we used to actually bowl in leagues together, then we start bowling alone. At least we're bowling, right? Now we just watch a sport and gamble on a sport, right? And you can go down the list of even music, even handwritten letters. This morning in Monica's session, you know, we wrote a letter. And how does that compare with just short text? So in this dopamine sort of culture, things have become a bit weird in so many ways and very, very challenging. This is, for those of you that are in India, this does not look like a traffic jam, but that's what I'm trying to communicate. If everywhere else is like, oh my God, this person's going this way, this person's going this way, how the heck do you find any sort of possibility of motion through this? And I think this is the world of polycrises that we're in. And it's only accelerated by technology. So technology automates status quo, and status quo is pretty bad. Right? And how fast is technology taking us? I mean, you just take a look at this graph. It took, before you look, okay, don't look. Back to the traffic jam. It took TV 60 years to get to 100 million users. It takes Netflix 11 years, right? It takes Netflix 10 years. It takes Facebook 4.5 years. ChatGPT, 2 months. Facebook Threads that came after that, 5 days. And last week, in a video now taken down from YouTube, Eric Schmidt, the first president of Google, was saying, I'm going to revise my estimate on AI every 6 months because I have no idea where it's going. And he says, most likely in 2 years, you're going to be able to give 1 paragraph prompt and say, create my own TikTok platform. and keep trying to have it go viral and repeat every hour. It's unimaginable, and yet not so unimaginable. So if we are accelerating that fast, and I'm not saying TikTok video, by the way, right? I'm saying the whole platform. If we're accelerating that fast to, preserve status quo, I think there's some real questions that start coming up. So who must we be to walk towards futures that we cannot even imagine? It's easy to go from point A to point B and say, give me a strategy to get there with all the known variables, but who must we be to actually walk towards something we don't even know we can't even imagine? And this is where you bring in the infinite game, right? If the finite game is played for the purpose of winning, the infinite game is played for the purpose of continuing to play.
Yes, baby.
It's not a winner and a loser. You get to be on the cover of a magazine. If I'm on the cover of a magazine, none of you are, right? If I'm number one, none of you are. So how do we create a different kind of winning that doesn't come at the expense of everybody else losing? And that's an infinite game, played for the purpose of continuing to play. And it's all over nature. Right? We've had so many references, including Sean yesterday, showing murmuration. This is an actual photo. National Geographic runner-up for Photo of the Year.
This is for you.
The photographer taking this photo didn't even realize this. There was a predator, and all these starlings said, we need to respond to the predator, and in like a matter of a couple seconds max, they create this incredible murmuration. And then in a couple seconds later, they dissolve it because the threat was no longer there. So now imagine if we said, hey, let's all get together in this formation. We would be like, where's the HR department? I want to be here. There's too much draft. There's a Benedictine monk who had like a totally on-point quote, which I think is a clue into the more infinite game. And he says, we humans prefer a manageable complexity to an unmanageable simplicity. Because if it's too simple, probably GDP doesn't go up, but more than that, our egos don't go up. Because if I come up with an idea in my head and I have the IP for it, it kind of feels good. Sort of, in a dopamine kind of way. But there are many examples in history of people who've kind of led with this unmanageable simplicity, this deep joy. I want to show you a little video of these two remarkable humans, one of whom just passed away a couple of years ago. One is the Dalai Lama, which I don't think who needs an introduction. I was told the other person might need an introduction, which is sort of a sad state of affairs, but the other one is Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu, of course, a pioneer in South Africa of so many things, but particularly truth and reconciliation, where he convinced an entire generation to forgive. He's just a remarkable human being, and both of them have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and yet unmanageable simplicity, unmanageable, or I don't know what the un-word is there, but this unbridled joy maybe. Take a look.
Mischievous, aren't you? I consider that person also is a mischievous person. Unfortunately, that person is Christian. Unfortunately, he's a Buddhist.
It's a question of how you think about your own death.
Quite bright. Quite bright. Well, he doesn't mind too much because there's reincarnation.
And I'm wondering, what is it about your friendship with each other that allows you to have this kind of extraordinary joy?
He's always troubling me. I admire him enormously. Oh, he's going to get proud. I'm just saying,
he is there for us as a beacon.
So I really love, you see, always teasing me, and also I tease him. You see, so we really become something quite special.
Yes.
So, and also his face. As you see, the head looks like monk now. You see, this picture, special picture, I think at the time of my death, I will remember you.
For those of you familiar with Buddhism may know that Dalai Lama practices how to die 5 times a day. He's not interested in carrying extra things with him, and so for him to say, I will remember Desmond Tutu, is an incredible compliment. And here these people are carrying 2 very different worldviews, and yet so deeply connected. And more than that, holding the weight of the world, so in touch with the suffering, and yet not losing connection to a more infinite game, not losing connection to that joy. So what is it? What is the lever that they are using, that so many giants have used? So I want to share a quote by one of my heroes, Gandhi. But before I do, this slide needs to change. Okay. Okay, Bucky Fuller, before I get to Gandhi. Bucky Fuller said, in order to change an existing paradigm, don't fight the old paradigm, just throw a better party, right? Like, so how do you actually throw a better party? What are these levers? And Gandhi gave us a pretty incredible clue. He says, men want systems to be so good that they don't have to be. Which is really another way of saying that we want to move the sort of responsibility of change, of peaceful coexistence, from the heart to the head. Because we've lost faith in the heart. We somehow think heart is a weak thing. I just don't understand how we've created that kind of culture. But Gandhi warned against it, he led against it, and he created a history based on that. So what he saw is that a typical way in which we create change, you usually start with political change, you get to constructive solutions, and then you get to personal transformation. But what he said is, what happens if you flip this around, you start with personal transformation, inner transformation, that then leads to constructive solutions, which then creates systemic change. One of my friends, one of our community friends, is a guy who is very actively involved in the climate movement for a long time. He organized very massive public protests and things. And he said, man, why is it that we are so fragmented in so many ways? And then there was this guy in India who just lifted a little bit of salt, and like the entire country gets behind him, and he rewrites the history books. What was it? So he went and studied it, and he drew this. His name is Chris Moore Bachman, and he drew this little diagram, which he calls the Gandhian iceberg. And it goes like this. He says, look, like there's inner transformation, self-purification, which is below the radar, so to speak, below the waterline. You can't notice it. Above it is the constructive programs, and then there's satyagraha, which is resistance of the old paradigm, which is so small. So he says it's not only flipping it, the proportions are entirely different. And I can tell you a lot more about this because it was true in Gandhi's context. And E.O. Wilson, the famous naturalist, shares a pretty remarkable quote. He says, the real problem of humanity is the following. He says, we have Paleolithic reactions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
That's so good.
I agree, that is so good, right? Because what we see is that we have extractive technology, which is compounding our impulsive reactions, which then really solidifies us into these very mechanical, lowest common denominator kind of institutions. How do we upgrade this to wiser technology that supports inner growth, which then brings us to collective emergence? And this is an open question. So then the deeper question of who must we be, you can reframe, augment to this. Who must we be to bend the arc of unimaginable futures towards greater compassion? At Service Space, which is the organization we started in 1999, we've been asking some of these questions. We're doing lots of different projects. I won't go into all of them, but fundamentally we said, how do we actually create a movement that is powered by intrinsic motivators, by volunteers? Like typically you say, oh, you're doing a volunteer project, lemonade stand, cute. But it used to be that you have the private sector, which is extrinsic motivators, and voluntary sector, which is intrinsic motivators, which is why you do things for the love of it, and the public sector would balance those for a healthy society. And now the private has just taken over everything. And if you tell somebody, yeah, it's like, what do? I always say, I volunteer. And they're like, what do you really do? I'm like, I really volunteer. Right? It's like, oh, it doesn't count. Oh, you're a head of state. You're a billionaire. Oh, okay, yeah, then I think you can create change. Where are we getting these ideas? So we started by doing micro-volunteering, lots of local circles, you know, peer-to-peer sort of platforms, many projects. But I want to touch into one, which is we said, well, if AI has come into our consciousness now, how are we going to bend its arc? So we created a compassion bot because we had tons of data over 25 years that was around compassion. But really the question that we started asking was, can AI be a third force to disentangle humanity out of its multiple polarities? Because we're clearly unable to do it right now. And the way I think of it is you have a microscope, which is a tool which helps you be in integrity with what's going on at a cellular level. And you have a telescope which lets you be in integrity with things that you cannot observe with your naked eye. Can AI be an inner scope that helps you see and grow in intrinsic ways? And in a way, if it is done particularly, if it's done outside market forces, can it go from inner scope to interscope? That it actually brings us together. And so if you look, I won't spend too much time on this, but I just think this is incredibly inspiring. If you look at this, you know, Richard Bloom, I think, came up in the 80s. He shared this whole idea of a 2 sigma solution to education. So if you go in a classroom and you give people personal tutoring, they are 2 standard deviations better. 2 standard deviations. I mean, that's like taking a person who's a C grade student and turning them into an A grade student. And so if you look at that and you say, can we apply this to Yoda bots, right? Can we actually have our own versions of Yoda, our own versions of wisdom, our own versions of how we want to grow, not how a company wants us to grow? So you say, well, to do that, you need a polyculture field of data commons. And so we started doing that. You know, we started a bot. It's an interfaith bot. From 1,700 different sacred texts from all the world's religions is put into a bot, and it has its own kind of intelligence. There's famous people like Sharon Salzberg, people from the climate world, historical figures, and ultimately it starts to really ask this question, well, what does a polycultural field of data commons look like? So I'm excited about that project, so I just wanted to kind of tell you about it. But this is coming purely from an ecosystem that is driven by intrinsic motivators. The lemonade stand, people are creating this whole ecosystem, right? Not market forces. 0 chance of monetizing anything because service-based never does that for the last 25 years. So, and yet you have, like, the kind of talent you can get for love is a lot more than the kind of talent you can get for money, in my opinion. So back to the infinite game, right? So if you were to ask me, hey, Nipun, you've been doing all this stuff for so long, what have you learned? And I would say these 4 principles. The first one, I'm a slide behind here. The first one is that everyone is good at something. You start with the notion that, you know, you don't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, as that quote goes.
I'm not sure about
You start with the notion that everyone is good at something. One of my friends was at SAP, and he had an autistic child, and he actually shifted the entire corporate paradigm because he hired 5 people on the autism spectrum. He says, what are they good at? They don't lie, they're never late, they're not bored. And he's like, wow, these are all the things that I would love to have as in my team. And so he hired 5 people, became so successful, Harvard case study, and the CEO of SAP says, hey, I want 1% of the company to be on the autism spectrum. And then lots of other companies followed suit, right? But this principle is a powerful one. I want to illustrate it with one of my favorite stories of Mother Teresa. And this actually happened with one of my friends who was there. She's volunteering as a young person, just being an intern, and Mother Teresa is entertaining some guests. And Mother Teresa, and this was a big funder, and they're doing some great things to support Mother Teresa's work. At the end, they said, hey, can we get a photo with you, Mother Teresa? And Mother Teresa's like, sure. They take a photo, photographer clicks, he's like, it's not quite a great photo. Can you move back a little bit, Mother Teresa? Okay, she moves back. Still not a great photo. Can you lean in this side a little bit? And Mother Teresa leans in this side. And by this point, my friend is getting furious, right? It's like, you're treating a beacon of compassion as an icon for your photo op. It's just not right, But she noticed Mother Teresa wasn't saying anything. And so, and then the photographer's like, click. Still not quite right. Goes in and moves Mother Teresa's face. And at the end of it, Mother Teresa still didn't say anything, but at the end, my friend goes up and asks Mother Teresa, says, Mother, why didn't you say anything? That is just wrong at so many levels. And Mother Teresa says in one sentence, also changes my friend's life. She says, my dear, there are many forms of poverty. That it's true, you do have material poverty, that does need to be addressed, but you also have emotional poverty, you also have spiritual poverty, you have all kinds of poverty. And that makes the flip also true, that there are multiple forms of wealth. And we don't design for it. We do so much to circulate financial capital, this belief in a belief. We have markets, and we have derivatives, and we do so much. How do we do that with other forms of capital? What are these other forms, right? Attention capital. What all of you are so generously giving in this moment. Community capital, nature capital. I mean, you can go down the list. Time capital, which is volunteering. Where are the markets for time capital? Why are we not designing a bigger pie? And to give you a quick example of this, we were part of this conference, and at the conference they had, Visa, MasterCard, you buy your tickets with anything you want. And then we said, well, let's accept multiple forms of wealth at this conference. Would you be willing to do that? And they said, yeah. And I would say, you guys should do that here next year. So we said, we'll take community wealth. Volunteer for a nonprofit in the community and tell us about it. We'll accept that wealth. We'll do kindness wealth. 5 acts for strangers. We'll accept that wealth. Creativity wealth. This is the theme of the conference, which in this case was mindfulness. Do a 5-minute selfie of what mindfulness means to you. Silence wealth. Spend 8 hours in silence and write an essay about it, and you're in. And when you honor that, so it was 800 people, and 500 were financial capital, and 300 were not free tickets because you needed to fill the seats. You are honoring their different forms of capital, and that changes the arc of the collective emergence in phenomenal ways. When I got to be at the White House, we got Obama to agree and go on record saying, hey, we should remember, there are many forms of wealth. And I think that's a powerful place to start, that everyone is good at something. The second big principle is not just that everyone is good at something, they can be great at giving. Your body is rewarded with oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and these endorphins. We don't need a marketing, we don't need to say volunteer of the year. Nature is giving it to you in that very moment. This is all science now, but those who knew it, like Dr. King says, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. He's not just saying it because it's a line that you can quote, right? He's saying it because it's true. Everyone can be great because everyone can serve. This is my friend. He didn't have, if you think of multiple forms of capital, he probably didn't have mobility capital because he didn't have legs. He lost them due to a medical condition. But he had other forms of capital. He also didn't have financial capital. He was living in a very poor part of the community. But whenever he would walk, his name was Raghu. Whenever Raghu would walk, he would he had slippers on his hands, and he would make the sound. And as he's doing that, everyone knew, oh, that's Raghu. But they also knew that Raghu was the kind of person that loved being generous. They were also not threatened by him because he is in the position that he is in. He used that and he says, I noticed that there's a lot of people, particularly women in our community, that are suffering, that have been subject to a lot of abuse. And so he goes up to them and he starts, he gives them something he has cultivated at home, a little tulsi plant. And he says, sister, this is for you. Whenever he finds out that somebody's been abused, he goes to these women and gives them these humble tulsi plants. And the next time he comes by, he goes and says, how is your tulsi plant doing? And oh, by the way, how are you doing? In a span of 2 years, he gave away something like 1,500 of these tulsi plants. And every time he walks, he creates these incredible connections. Everyone, he reaches out to them, gives them a little resilience. This is value that only Raghu could create. No NGO, no for-profit, no community organization is able to touch this kind of value because Raghu is not just good at something, he knew he was great at giving and he wanted to cultivate that gift. The third principle is that as this giving gets connected, a murmuration emerges. And I've already shown you this photo. It's an incredible photo. That when you see this, you're like, why are we not able to do that right now? Because we haven't done the pre-work. We haven't done the stuff that's below the iceberg. And if we haven't done that, we can't fall into this kind of a formation. But what a murmuration teaches us is to move from transaction to relationship. Transaction privileges accumulation. When you transact, I take, I keep, and I build my power based on what I keep. Relationships privileges circulation. So you see all these kids, right? Like paying, with sort of doing, they're not doing quid pro quo. They're not like, well, you gave me a nice massage, so I'm not, I'm going to give you the equivalent massage. No, they're just saying, look, we're all paying it forward, and when we do, it creates a different pattern of collective emergence. So we looked at this principle and we're like, well, it's nice to talk about it. How do you make it concrete? How do you make it practical? So we did this as an experiment, and now it's spread to like 23 countries around the world. It's called Karma Kitchen. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's been in many places out here in Europe. You walk into a Karma Kitchen and your check reads 0. But it's 0 not because it's free, not because some rich person has paid for it or some government program has paid for it. It's 0 because someone before you has paid for you and you are trusted to pay forward for people after you. And most of us think that, oh, this is naive, it can never work. People will take advantage of the situation. Of course, many people did think that you walk into such a place. Where we started in Berkeley, it became the top-rated restaurant across all of Berkeley, right? And it was like a bunch of volunteers running it, and we had a huge wait list of people wanting to volunteer. We had a huge wait list of people wanting to come in, and we had everybody just contributing so much. And we were like, first time we did it, we didn't know it was going to work. We said, hey, we try it. If we fail, fine, And it worked, and it continued, and it went on to so many places around the world. But what happens, everybody's asking, UC Berkeley did a paper on this, and the title of that paper was Paying More When Paying for Others. And everyone is always curious, does it work? Right? And that's a reasonable question. What they're really saying is, do you make your money? But that's the wrong question. Sure, that's an important question. You got to make the money. That's not where the real gold is. The real gold is what happens in that space of collective emergence where no one in this restaurant is paying for themselves. It changes what happens. If we had more time, maybe tomorrow, I'll tell you story after, I won't tell you story after story, but at least I'll tell you one story of how incredible it is when people tap into that space and how they behave differently. Right? It just changes the rules of the game. This is Vienna. They did this last summer for 2 months in Vienna. They said Vienna was just voted the grumpiest city in Europe or something like that, and they said we want to make it the friendliest city. It was all over the news, and it's not just food, right? This is a rickshaw driver that does it in India. This is a magazine where Richard does this. Twee, who runs acupuncture clinic, says I'm inviting everyone into a deeper relationship with each other. Not even at a material level, but to, in that moment, connect with the person before you. pay forward for somebody who'll never say thank you to you. And you're like, oh, that's utopia. Who's tried it? Who told you it's utopia? It's possible here, right? And so these kinds of things, what they really tap into is, you know, in the AI worlds, we say generative artificial intelligence, generative AI, that's the buzzword. We call this generative heart intelligence. Generative HI starts like this. You serve without transaction. That leads to an inner transformation. Immediately, you are not market funded, you are nature funded. Because you will be filled with joy and compassion. You'll be filled with serotonin and oxytocin and dopamine. And when you do that, invariably, there's no boundary. I can draw a boundary between you and me at a physical level, but where are you drawing the boundary between my mind and your mind? What, here, here, here? And if I don't know where the boundary is between your mind and my mind, can I honestly, in all integrity, say that these are my words? These are my actions, that I should get credit for this, that let me accumulate this? So invariably you start to get into an outer murmuration. And when you do, we have this line in Service Space. It says, the reward for service is more service. If you do it right, you're gonna invariably wanna serve more. And so this is generative heart intelligence. And it's a shame that we don't have billions of examples of this kind of stuff, but in a way we all do, because we're born to our mothers with 9 months of a gift that has no strings attached. We all know it in our bones. So, number one, right? We said that if we can play a more infinite game, we arrive at this idea that everyone is good at something. We're not measuring them by our selfish interests, but actually just seeing what they have to offer. When everyone has a gift, we arrive at this idea that everyone can be great at giving. When everyone's generosity is engaged, a murmuration emerges. And the fourth and the final thing is that when such a murmuration emerges, everyone is connected to everything. If we bypass all of these steps and we're just like, look, man, can't you see we're breathing the same air? Doesn't work, as we have seen repeatedly. But if we do all of this homework, if we create those spaces, if we experience that inner transformation and continue to grow, help each other grow, tap into this deep collective emergence, which is a whole greater than the sum of the parts, we arrive at this profound idea. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. There are two things. I'm looking at, you know, if we do that, we arrive at this profound idea that everyone is connected to everything. I come from a little bit of a science background, right? And so I like to look at numbers and things sometimes. If you look at a one-to-many network, sort of what I'm doing right now, 50 people, right? This little side of it, how many connections do we have in that kind of a TV model? One-to-many, 50 connections. Then we go in and say, well, let's all talk to each other. Right? In a one-to-one network with 50 people, how many connections would you have? Turns out to be 1,225. Now, if we say, what if we create a group-forming network? How many unique connections are possible in a group-forming network with just 50 people? I'm not even talking about interspecies. I'm not even talking about beyond all of that. I'm just saying, even if you do it at a very tactile level, you are talking 100 million trillion. This is just math. Everyone is connected to everything in profound ways that our mind cannot even grok. Right? Another way to view this is to go from a centralized to a decentralized to distributed. It's completely a many-to-many phenomenon. This is what life has actually always been. So Frederick Lalo's work talks about this. You know, he says, we used to organize as wolf packs, very reactive. You do this, I do this, I pull out a gun, you pull out a gun, and half of us die. Right? Or as Gandhi would say, eye for an eye and the whole world is blind. You go from there to a more mechanistic, to a more sort of command and control model of the army. You go from there to a more mechanistic, machine-like view, which is the modern-day corporation. You know, you either, you know, you get with the program, or I fire you and bring in somebody else. Now it's a little bit better. Some are purpose-oriented, so it's more family style, where you have a kind of shared narrative. But I think where we all can upgrade beyond this is a living systems view. What we think of as social permaculture, which is a topic for another day, but I did meet a permaculturist. For those that don't know about permaculture, I would encourage you to look into it. It's an incredible metaphor. So one of my friends has popularized permaculture all across Vietnam. And I asked her, I said, she translated Fukuoka's book, and you know, she's a remarkable human being, really being the change at so many levels. And I asked her, well, here you go, just take a look. I'm with Hung Mai in Vietnam, and I asked her the question, well, what's the most commonly asked inquiry that you get when you go to the cities? And what would you say, Hung Mai?
The questions we often ask is what to grow here, instead of what grows here.
Wow. That is a profound statement. If you're asking the question, what to grow here, you've probably accumulated way too much of the dominant paradigm resources. If you're rooted in this emergence, you are not asking the question, what to grow here. You're asking the question, what grows here, and how can I support patterns of positive deviance that are aligned with my values? I mean, this is a person that lives that kind of work in the world, and what I think of is, this is the difference between market logic and love logic. I mean, this is not a new idea. It's something we all know. I could give you examples after examples, but at its core, I think we see where transaction is leading us. It leads us to extraction and leads us to disconnection. Can we actually use love logic to go to relationships? And as we do, we move from relationship to deep connection, from deep connection to this sense of community, not between me and me, but between we and we. I'm here alone, you give me a hug, but you're also giving a hug to my mom and dad because they've influenced me so much, they've nourished me so much. And when we have a we-to-we kind of a community, all kinds of different possibilities are available to us because we move to emergence. And when we move to emergence, then we have genuine emergence, rooted in this we-to-we kind of a community, then we have all the reason to expect a black swan of compassion to arise, which is this completely unpredictable phenomena, which is, for those of you that have read Nicholas Taleb's book, majority of the events that humans have faced in history are, we keep trying these hindsight, rules of causation, but actually we haven't been able to predict any of them. So black swan events is our history. Can we do a black swan of compassion? We surely need it, but we can't just sit there and do nothing. I think we have to move from transaction to relationship, which then gets us to a deeper sense of connection and community, which awakes a field of social emergence and then allows us to create the conditions in which these incredibly unexpected patterns of positive deviance can arise. And to give you one example, a small example of an incredible change maker from Indian history, somebody I was privileged to know. This is Ishwar Kaka, and that's his wife. Both of them, Vasudhaba, both of them, they were like grandparents to me. Both of them changed the history of India in remarkable ways. Ishwar Kaka in particular dedicated his life to sanitation. Because of him, hundreds of thousands of people have toilets. And not just that, because of him, more than 150 organizations started, and today, of course, everything is so very different. At his funeral, everyone from janitors, because that was the community he was enmeshed in, to the heads of state, they all came, they shut down streets, tens of thousands of people are there. Everyone says all these amazing things about Ishwar Kaka, and then his wife goes to speak last. She says, "We have been married more than 50 years. I have seen all the work he has done, and I agree, it's remarkable. But I'll tell you one thing, which is why he gets my deepest bow." He says, "This was a man who never once, in all our years, got angry with me." Never once, his wife is saying at the funeral, and he was like that. He worked in incredibly courageous ways to change the dominant paradigm, but he never took an either-or approach. He never played a finite game. He was rooted in an infinite game. And what he teaches us is that we are not merely what we do, but who we become by what we do. And, you know, it doesn't need to be these giant stories of people who have created big change, even everyday folks. I was in Austria, and on the trip before last, I had to go on stage right before I go to the bathroom, and in the bathroom I meet this one fellow, and this guy says, "You don't look like you're from here," and I said, "Yeah, I'm not." And he says, you know, we were talking like maybe a couple more minutes, not minutes, a couple more seconds, maybe 30 seconds, I don't know. Very short kind of conversation, but we sort of vibed. And he looks at me and he says, you know, "Hey, if you need a ride, let me know. I'll be happy to help." I was like, "Oh, that's really sweet of you." You know, we talk another 30 seconds or so, and he says, "Oh, hey man, you know, if you need a place to stay, I'd be happy to host you." I'm like, "Man, Austria is amazing, right?" You're like, "Wow." I said, "Okay, yeah." And then we were reaching peak bathroom status. So when he asked me, you know, like we should exchange contact information, and he didn't know anything about who I am. I didn't know who he was. I said, "You know, instead of here, we'll just go. Let's meet outside the door." And he says, "Yeah, okay, you go ahead. I'll meet you in there." And instead of coming out with me, I noticed, and he had already gone in. He went in, and then he starts opening all the stall doors. And I realized he was the janitor. And I asked myself the question that if he treated me like a brother by being willing to give me a ride, being willing to give me a place to stay, who must I be to receive that gift? That if that was really my brother, I would go in there with him right now and help him clean the toilets. And so I did. And it was a very powerful experience for me to realize that wherever we are actually sending a message by our very being to the web of emergence. I want to close with a song. A cellist in Sarajevo went out to the square when the bombs were exploding. And people from the press came up and they said, "Why are you out here playing the cello when everyone is dropping bombs?" Because he went to the very place, and he looks at them in the media and he says, "Why are they dropping bombs when I am playing the cello?" And this woman named Holly Neer narrated that story when she was at a conference, and she sang this song, which I think mirrors what we have experienced, not just here in what I was sharing, but really what we're all holding for the last 2 days. So a little song here.
Can you call on your imagination as if telling a myth to a child? Put it the fantastical, wonderful, magical, and the romantic, the brave and the wild. Once upon a time there was a power so great that no one could know its name. People tried to claim it, and with it always such arrogance and it in shame. Thousands of years would pass in a moment, hundreds of cultures would come and go, each generation with a glorious calling, even when they were too busy to know. And then one day, after 2 millennia,
time is that I go and stand there in the middle of the stage, and then I try to say something. And it feels so weird to try and do that alone when everything we're talking about is together. So what we're going to do is this year, it's my great honor to stand next to you.
Okay, I'm
say
ready for
together.
this. All right. What do I say? It was a great conference.
You say thank you.
Okay, but can I say one thing then, now that you're giving me this opportunity?
Yes, please.
I would say treat the speakers as not folks on the stage, but as your fellow stewards of emergence. Because so many times we end up projecting that and it creates that distance, you know, and maybe sometimes people are in that space, but I think we're all a lot stronger if we hug each other, if we engage, and we're like, whatever roles and titles and all this stuff that we have, man, we are much more than that. Let's birth it between even this small interaction.
And what I very often say here, what I very often say is,
I love you, bro.
You and I, man, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
What I often say is, if something has particularly moved you or challenged you, remember to share the videos with your friends. But I will say one more thing, don't just share the video, or don't just share the video, I mean do. But then talk to the friend about it. Just have a conversation. Should that be?
Sounds good, let's start with a hug here.